I was born in the dusky hush of late summer, deep inside a hard-shelled pod that dangled at the tip of a branch no wider than a sparrow's ankle. My mother tree stood alone on a windswept ridge where the valley's mists curled upward at dawn, then fled before answering sun. All season long, I rested, pressed among siblings in sticky sap, listening to the creak of wood and the hum of insects that marched across the bark. When the ridge turned gold and mornings grew brittle, the pod split open. Gravity tugged at us, inviting us to let go. Most of my kin surrendered, tumbling to the roots below. I hesitated. Something inside me refused to settle for the familiar earth I could already smell. I wanted to see farther than the grove's edge, to feel a sky beyond these hills. The wind obliged first, spinning me outward like a brown star, but a stronger hand intercepted. A flock of northern swifts had gathered in the canopy, probing for insects before resuming their long migration. One darted through the pods, the beat of her wings a warm thunder. The sticky resin on my shell snagged against the soft vein of her secondary feather. I found myself clinging to her the way a lantern clings to darkness, fiercely, almost gratefully, without questioning the oddness of such a union. Thus began my apprenticeship to flight. The swift leapt from the branch, and suddenly the ridge, the valley, and even my mother's crown collapsed into a single patch of color. Wind battered against my hull, prying, questioning, tasting. The bird's muscles rippled beneath feathers. Every stroke lifted us higher until the air grew thin and rang like hammered glass. Dawn spilled vermilion across cloud tops. I would have gasped had I possessed lungs. Instead, I pressed tighter, letting the rhythm of her heart beat through the hollow of my own dreams. For days, the world unfurled beneath us in broad, moving tapestries. The mountains marched backward, their ragged silhouettes dissolving into high meadows, then into rolling fields stitched by rivers. At night, the flock roosted only briefly, clinging to cliff faces or tall reeds. Moonlight silvered the barbs of my adopted feather, turning it into a tiny sword that cut the dark. I listened to the soft cheeps the swifts traded about wind patterns, fatigue, and the promise of insects farther south. Their language was simple, present, immediate, but suffused with communal certainty. I, who knew only potential and hunger for soil, borrowed courage from them. One afternoon, black clouds stacked on the horizon like boulders. The air prickled with static. Thunder rumbled so low it vibrated through the swift's bones into my own compact form. Rain burst upon us, stinging needles of water. My bird dipped, rose, darted sideways through invisible tunnels of pressure. From far below, lightning sprawled across plains, licking the grass into momentary whiteness. She fought the storm for hours, but wind always asks its toll. Near twilight, a gust snatched several feathers from her wings. One of them was mine. I tumbled, a lone mote amid shrieking air, turning end over end, no longer a passenger, but flotsam. Fear pierced me then, not because of speed or descent, but because I sensed that every story might end unfinished. Yet the same gust that tore me away swept me forward. I landed on the soft neck plumage of a snow goose, riding the storm's tail. My shell, still sticky, welded itself immediately. The goose noticed little. She was part of a broad chevron bound for warmer waters, her mind fixed on magnetic lines older than mountains. My second carrier gave me a different vantage. Swifts fly high and fast. Geese fly deliberate, steady, their wings laboring like oars. Dawn found us over wetlands where silver threads of estuary wound among reeds. I smelled salt for the first time, tangy, insistent, though I could not taste. The goose's down was thick, warm, a traveling hearth. When the flock settled on a Mirror-still lagoon, I glimpsed the reflections of clouds, as though the sky had turned itself inside out to cradle them. A week later, we crossed human country. Rectangles of farmland lay stitched by hedgerows. Roads ran like pale veins. Metal towers whirred at the horizon. On an evening quilted with thin cirrus, I heard music, distant bells from a church in a river town. The notes drifted up, weaving through the slipstream. Some seeds are carried by chance, some by cunning hooks, some by the pulse of fruit against ground. I rode on melody. When mid-autumn arrived, the goose molted. One morning, I felt myself loosening, the feather beneath me ready to depart like a raft in spring melt. We were circling a broad floodplain where a braided river glistened, each channel flashing back the sun. The flock spiraled down to rest. As she banked, the feather detached. I fluttered earthward, twirling through warm thermals that smelled of water and rot. The feather touched down on a sandbar crowded with driftwood. I slid free, settling into a cranny between pebbles, uncertain whether my voyage had ended. The river decided otherwise. At dusk, the tide rose, tongues of water curling around the sandbar. A curious eddy lifted me, cradling my shell within its cool swirl. Soon I was adrift again, this time without wings or feathers, an oarless voyager surrendering to liquid intent. Fish flickered beneath, torpedo flashes in dim light, reeds bowed as I passed. Somewhere upstream, a beaver slapped its tail, and the vibration traveled the waterskin to me, saying, "Here, all journeys are circular." For 3 days, the river carried me southward, sliding through oxbows and under bridges. Children leaned over railings, their laughter raining down. A fallen leaf joined my flotilla, bright as a candle before turning sodden and dark. Her dissolution frightened me, yet I admired her willingness to yield. On the fourth morning, the river spilled into a large lake, its shores blurred by fog. Wind pushed surface ripples toward a quiet cove cluttered with silt. I drifted ashore, finally resting on soil that smelled rich with decay and promise. Stillness settled. No feathers, no wing beats, no current, only the patient hush of late autumn. Leaves whispered overhead. Frost arrived one dawn, and I felt it sheath my hull in crystal grime. Dormancy claimed me, a lullaby of cold and darkness. Inside, the embryo of who I might become curled tight, counting silent days. Winter, snow, muffled every sound except the rare crack of ice on lake edges and the tap of woodpecker beaks exploring trunks. When soil temperature rose, something shifted. Water seeped through a hairline crack that had formed along my seam. It entered like a question, then became an answer. A spark I had carried since ridge days awoke, commanding expansion. My coat softened, split, a tentative radical. Thin as sewing thread, pushed downward, sniffing for anchorage. Simultaneously, a pale shoot arched upward, driven by instructions older than memory. I emerged into mottled sunlight beneath budding willows and alder. Millions of other seedlings dotted the loam, but I felt no rivalry, only communion in green. Growth is both riotous and orderly. Cells divided, wove themselves into xylem, phloem, cambium. I learned the taste of minerals, the tug of capillary action, the whisper of mycorrhizal fungi offering phosphorus in exchange for sugars. Spring insects, drunk on pollen, danced among new leaves, my leaves, and their small feet tickled as surely as if they tapped my own skin. The first drought taught me resilience. The lake shrank, mud cracked, and midday sun hammered everything flat. My highest leaves wilted, but roots burrowed deeper, seeking damp layers. I pulled water thread by thread until clouds returned and rain hammered joy into every pore. Each season added rings inside my trunk, hidden testaments to both scarcity and bounty. 5 winters passed before birds nested in my branches, sparrows stitched grass cups, their cheeping infants calling at dawn. I remembered, how could I forget, the swift's high laughter, the goose's honk against twilight. Hosting these new tenants thrilled me. They preened, courted, quarreled, carried away tiny mites that would have burdened me. In gratitude, I offered shade and the soft sigh of leaves that cooled their eggs. Humans discovered me next. A barefoot girl and her younger brother wandered the shoreline one summer afternoon. They circled my trunk, pressing palms to bark, measuring girth with fingers that smelled of lake water and berries. The boy wedged a toy sailboat between 2 of my surface roots, proclaiming the harbor safe. I felt the hollow knock of the wooden hull like affectionate taps. Before leaving, the girl braided a necklace of daisies and hung it on a low branch. Their laughter joined the chorus of insects, another form of birdsong I vowed to shelter. Decades unspooled, my crown broadened, fanning over the lake's edge so my reflection merged with sky. Beavers gnawed nearby poplars, but spared me, perhaps sensing the service my roots performed in preventing erosion. Herons built stick fortresses high among my limbs, their gangly young clacking impatient jaws at any parent returning with fish. On still days, I felt the thrum of dragonfly wings weaving among cattails. Each creature engaged in its own migration, some across continents, others across hours. Yet my stationary life intersected all their stories. Storms returned with fury occasionally. One late summer cyclone whipped whitecaps against my trunk, tearing off branches that had once been proud skyward spears. Pain coursed through sapwood, but I bent, refusing to break. When calm returned, woodpeckers excavated the shattered limbs into cavities for their brood. Wounds became doors, loss became shelter. I began to understand that a tree's courage isn't measured by unbrokenness, but by the generosity with which it offers its scars. Children grew into adults. The girl with the daisy necklace returned years later, broad-shouldered and solemn, leading her own son to the water. She traced the pattern of cambium ridges with the same fingers now calloused from violin strings. Her son asked why some bark bore burns. She knelt and told him of a campfire that had once roared too near me and of how new shoots sprouted afterward in ash-rich soil. I savored her telling because memory stored in one species becomes wisdom when shared with another. Generations cycled like moon phases. Warblers reenacted their grand flights overhead, stitching invisible roads across sky. I liked to imagine distant cousins of the swift that had first carried me, or great-grand goslings of that valiant snow goose, glancing down at me, unknowingly saluting an old passenger. Leaves fleshed green, then gold, then fell, rings multiplied, hardening into time's ledger. One spring, scientists arrived with notebooks and bright flagging tape. They measured my canopy spread, my trunk diameter, recorded GPS coordinates. I felt trepidation, but their intentions proved benevolent. They declared the cove a protected wetland, vital to migratory birds and shoreline stability. Posts went up bearing signs, rest and refuge. Humans whose buildings often grow where trees once stood had instead chosen to stand guard around me. I wrestled gratitude. The boy who had wedged the sailboat, now a bearded teacher, led schoolchildren on field trips. Under my shade, he explained photosynthesis, carbon cycles, how roots communicate through chemical gossip. The children looked upward, mouths round with wonder, and I responded with a soft rain of catkins that dusted their hair like confetti. I had become more than a plant. I was a library written in cellulose, and every cough of wind turned my pages. One autumn evening, a great-grandmother approached, leaning on a carved cane. Her family spread blankets under my branches, celebrating her 85th birthday. Lanterns hung like captured stars. She told them she had once rescued a fledgling sparrow here in her youth. I recognized her voice, fainter now, but still carrying the tremolo of the barefoot girl. She touched my bark and whispered, "Old friend." Time coiled inward then, shrinking decades to a single heartbeat. I answered with a gust that shook leaves loose, letting them spiral around her like blessings. Now I am massive, my canopy wide enough to sketch circles of shade that migrate across the lawn from dawn to dusk. Roots lace deep into water table secrets. Branches host fox squirrels that leap impossible chasms for acorns. When I listen, I can still hear the river murmur under loam, can feel the faint tug of feathers on wind, a phantom memory of flight. Travelers rest in my arms, monarch butterflies preparing to cross oceans of air, children hiding from chores, artists seeking lines to draw. I cradle them all as I was once cradled. Sometimes at night, when fog tongues from the lake and the moon is a polished coin, I recount my story in the rustle of leaves. The breeze carries fragments outward, a mountain ridge, a brave swift, a thunderstorm's theft, a goose's steadfast wings, a river's lullaby, the silent miracle of germination. Listening owls cock their heads, bats flutter close as though trying to read the braille of my bark. I wonder if another seed sleeps somewhere in my branches, waiting for a clever hitchhike on a hawk's talon. A duck's plumage, perhaps even on the sole of a child's shoe, to chart its own unwritten map. When it flies, may the world open for it as it opened for me, and when, long hence, it roots and rises, may it remember the lineage of courage that traveled from ridge to feather to riverbank to red gold crown. Because we seeds, then saplings, then towering elders, do not conquer distance by muscle or will alone. We are borne forward by cascades of generosity, birds who loan us flight, waters that ferry us, soils that cradle, storms that prune, hands that protect. Every ring inside me is a testament to those gifts, so I stand unashamed of stillness, for my trunk is a memorial to momentum. Wind visits, I answer. Storms test, I yield and endure. Creatures need refuge, I open my arms, and through each heartbeat of sap, I carry forward the echo of that first intoxicating sky, that fearless leap onto feathers, that longing not merely to survive but to journey. Listen then to this hush beneath leaves. It is the oldest song I know, written long before roots anchored me, sung still by swifts invisible in the stars. It says move, even when motion seems impossible, trust, even when the fall is dizzying, grow, even when the world bruises you. For somewhere, generations hence, there will be laughter under your branches, stories in your bark, and newborn seeds dreaming of flight.